One of the few remaining tropical swamp forests, Tanjung Puting National Park in Indonesia is home to a wide variety of wildlife, including the endangered orangutan, Asia's only great ape. Despite its national park status, Tanjung Puting is being commercially logged, and the timber ends up as products for sale in Europe, America, Japan, and China. EIA and Telepak Indonesia's new report, Above the Law, exposes how powerful timber barons and corrupt authorities are systematically destroying Indonesia's precious tropical forests. Around 70% of all timber produced by Indonesia is illegally cut. This massive business, heavily reliant on endemic corruption, deprives communities of their precious natural resources, the government of revenue, and is driving many species towards extinction. The most valuable tree species being targeted is called ramen. Ramen grows in natural swamp forest areas in Indonesia and Malaysia. It has never been successfully grown in plantations. This species has driven the timber barons into protected areas such as Tanjung Puting, where the last stands of commercially valuable ramen exist. Loggers are paid about $2 per day for their arduous and dangerous work. Supplied chainsaws by the timber bosses, they live and work in leech-infested swamps, pulling the logs out by hand on crudely built log rails. The destruction to the forest is enormous, from logging camps, roads, rails, and removal of valuable timber. At the heart of this business lie influential businessmen with support from politicians, the military, and local officials. This business breeds and spreads corruption. One such businessman and politician is Abdul Rashid, who stands accused of being behind the destruction of Tanjung Puting National Park. Log rafts float the ramen down river systems in the park to sawmills and factories. Abdul Rashid's company set up a huge ramen processing factory, processing ramen logs into products for export, including doweling and window blinds. EIA and Telepak investigators infiltrated the company by posing as timber buyers and were offered illegal business by one of its directors. Processed ramen from this factory sells for around $1,000 per cubic meter. In 1999, after 5 undercover operations, EIA and Telepak first exposed the criminal activities of Abdul Rashid and his family business, Tanjung Linga. What follows shows how those that control illegal logging employ violence and corruption and are untouched by the authorities. In January 2000, Rui and Faith Doherty from EIA and Telepak returned to the park and the nearby town of Pangkalanbun to gather new information. It was on this trip that Rui and Faith were kidnapped, assaulted, and held hostage by 3 directors from Tanjung Linga, including Abdul Rashid's nephew Sugianto and their armed bodyguards.
Outside here there is a mob of thugs who belong to Tanjung Linga, and as I'm speaking to you there are 2 men at the window looking in as well who are also part of the mob. And across the street the police are arming themselves with rifles and preparing, I hope, to take Rui and I to the airport so that we can get out of here.
It took 3 days of intense pressure and negotiations from Indonesian and international NGOs, generals, politicians, and the British government to help secure their release. Tanjung Linga deployed a lynch mob, relied on their corrupt policemen, including the regional police commander, to block their release, and used violence and intimidation throughout the activists' captivity. In late 2001, a journalist called Abi Kuzno gave information to the Forestry Department about 3 cargo ships being loaded with illegal logs belonging to the Tanjung Group. These 3 ships, bound for China, were intercepted by the Indonesian Navy and escorted to Jakarta, away from Rasid's power base in Pangkalanbun. The ships were carrying around $4 million of illegal logs, and documentation clearly showed the involvement of companies and individuals linked to Rasid. Despite such evidence, the police failed to investigate the case, and instead released the ships and auctioned the stolen timber. Once again, corruption undermined the rule of law in Indonesia. Abi Kusno comes from Pangkalanbun and was returning home from a trip to Java when he was assaulted by a mob of people who proceeded to attack him with machetes and knives. Leaving him for dead, the mob moved on.
Jadi ini yang jelas di sini luka, telinga sisa 1 senti, kemudian nih tangan ini putus total, permanen. Yang ini tulang ini 2 putus, dua-duanya putus.
None of those investigated by the police and identified by Rui, Faith, and Abi Kusno as being responsible for their assaults, injuries, and attempted murder have been brought to justice in the Indonesian courts. Abdul Rasid, Sugianto, his nephew, and the Tanjung mob and bodyguards are free to this day to continue their violence and criminal activities in the forests of Indonesia. The activities of people like Rasid feed a global business in illegal timber worth billions of dollars every year. Timber looted from Indonesia ends up in the major timber markets of the US, Europe, Japan, and China. Sophisticated networks serve to launder the timber onto the international market, often via third countries such as Malaysia and Singapore. EIA has tracked vast amounts of timber from Indonesia being smuggled into Malaysia. In one case, barges are loaded in Kalimantan and taken to peninsular Malaysia, such as this one, found unloading in Batu Pahat, Malaysia, in August 2001. As well as Malaysia, Singapore is also a hub for the timber business. From here, ramen and other timber species are sold onto the international market. Products such as window blinds, picture frames, and moldings are sold throughout the world. Illegal logging, fueled by corruption, is tearing the heart out of Indonesia's forests, depleting ecosystems and impacting forest communities. The village of Sungai Utik in the Indonesian state of West Kalimantan lies near the border with Malaysia and has seen its trees plundered.
Ate ura bukai nyancuri kayo Indonesia atau baik ke Malaysia. Jadi Indonesia Malaysia nyual ke Indonesia agak Jepang kini, agak Belanda kini, agak Eropa kini, Amerika kini, Australia kini, agak Jepun kini.
Major consumers of tropical timber are also complicit, as it is the demand for cheap tropical timber which drives illegal logging. It is vital that the world's major economies take the lead and devise methods for excluding illegal timber from their markets.
There have been some brave efforts by various officials within the Ministry of Forestry and other agencies, but what we're seeing is that they're undermined constantly by criminal activity, by bribery, by all kinds of things going on illegally behind the scenes. It's time now that President Megawati, the President's office, steps in to give support to the Minister of Forestry and tries to get some of the reforms that are necessary in this sector through. It's also vital that importing countries, timber importing countries, enact legislation that makes it illegal to import illegally sourced timber and timber products. It's necessary that the demand countries bring in their own laws to prevent this activity continuing.